Indians confuse pluralism with secularism. What is your take?
Okay, I am in a certain circle on social media where I think most people who interact with me, I don't know about most people who follow me, but definitely most people who interact with me understand that difference pretty well. I have written on this, and so I've had interactions on this, and I don't find that problem. But in larger, let's Twitter is not India, Twitter is not the world. So yeah, from a larger perspective, I think that is perhaps true. But then again, from a larger perspective, I don't think many people even think about these questions, the differences between these things.
No, but it is important. I'll tell you why.
It
Because
is important, definitely. All I'm saying is most people just don't, they just want to know, if they can score the tickets to the first day, first show of the next Salman Khan movie, for example. That's all they care about.
yeah, that's why they're conceptually weak and consider. I always say that
Absolutely.
Twitter has two kinds of people. There are kinds of people like you and I and many others like us. There is a, I think there is a core group of like 5-6 thousand people who are really, keen on, somebody might say balki khal ukhadna, but I think balki khal ukhadni padti hai kuch cheezon mein.
Hmm.
So, some of us are very keen, and that's why, you and I keep on having these conversations because we want to rehash these things and, make ourselves intellectually strong. But then there is a large swath of people who are craving for these answers, who may be conceptually weak in these things, but are not getting them. And that's why, people like you and I have these discussions. Now, it is very important to understand what is pluralism and what is secularism. Now, a lot of times, you hear this, oh, Hinduism is secular by nature. Ancient India was secular. No,
It's
ancient
not.
India was plural. It was never secular.
Agreed. I mean, the difference is secularism takes, at least, if you go back to, the founders, or whatever, call it, like France, for example, secularism has a certain hostility towards religion. It's a very mild hostility, but nonetheless, it is there. Whereas pluralism is not there. The other thing is that with pluralism, you can accept all religions the way secularism sort of does, in the sense by distancing in secularism, and in pluralism, it's without the distancing. You accept all the religions, and That's what the difference is between the two. Now, what does this mean? I'll tell you what it means. Now, look at, say, for example, how, say, Savarkar or somebody would have defined India, or how he did define, India. It's a Hindu country, undoubtedly, because it has a Hindu heritage, there's a Hindu past, there's a Hindu majority, and the other religions like Christianity and Islam came from outside. They're not from within the fold. Even if the Muslims and the Christians in India today are essentially ex-Hindus, are of South Asian stock by blood, not Arabs or Europeans or whatever. Even then, he's not pointing to the people. He's saying this idea comes from out there, and whoever follows this idea, has to understand that. I'm not saying you are an outsider necessarily, but this idea is from out there. Having said that, he's perfectly fine if, he's not saying like, let's kick all these guys out now. They have no place in this India, or within Hinduism, for example. He was, this temple entry and all that. He said, no, we're Hindus and we're Hindus, and let's be done with it. And we can't, start off who's a Vaishnav and who's a Shaivite and who's an Iyengar or who's a Lingayat, and these are meaningless. These are silly differentiations. Follow them as much as you want at home and do your thing. But as a society, we need to move on. So there is that sense of pluralism, whereas you don't see the same thing, for example, in your so-called secular states. For example, I would challenge you to imagine the next monarch, king or queen of England being Catholic. God forbid Jewish or Muslim or something, even Catholic, because the monarch is the head of the Anglican Church. How could the head of an Anglican church be Catholic? You can't. And so, but England's a secular society. How does that work? So if you really want to start nitpicking, I can find 50,000 flaws in all these so-called very nice societies, which seem to have worked all these issues out. They haven't worked these issues out. I don't know what the issue, the real difference is that in India we have the level of diversity and pluralism we have in India is mind-boggling, and these people are largely homogenous, and so they can get away with so many things. Somebody says, "Oh, the king has to be an Anglican," and that's perfectly legitimate in England because most people are. And even the ones who are not will not protest for the simple reason their father was or their grandfather was Anglican, so they come from that stock. In India, that's the first thing. The second thing is, you have, at the end of the day, we have to look at our own deeds. When parties start playing vote bank politics, and you keep telling people, you will get rewarded if you think this way and if you argue this way. you're asking, and who, if the government comes and says, hey, here's a scheme in which, you could be paid 1 crore a year, okay, by pretending to do this, who wouldn't want to do that, right? So you have vote bank politics. You're rewarded for thinking in a certain way, and it takes a phenomenal amount of morality to say no. We're going to refrain from this um, for the sake of the national good. Especially in a country like India, for the simple reason that giving up your benefits doesn't seem to mean anything. One of the reasons I think we don't pay taxes is because we think that it goes into the pockets of some politician. It doesn't do any good to anybody. Are Indians genuinely miserly? No, you see the generosity, in at many different levels, local levels, but we don't want to pay tax. The same person will not want to pay tax because he thinks the money is being wasted, right? The same way, when you're looking at these minority communities, they don't want to give up their special rights, and political parties have played on that for a long time. And I'm not talking about Congress, because that's still a post 1947 kind of phenomenon, vote banks and all that. But even if you look at before that, the British played on that, and these guys played into it perfectly. The British said, let's divide, and people were ready to be divided. And then of course people can say, okay, but the Muslims decided to go off first. They're the ones who decided to declare Pakistan, and they were the ones who caused. Yeah, maybe that's not what we're discussing here today. All I'm saying is, if bad behavior is rewarded, then I guarantee you bad behavior will continue.
Yeah, and this is again, it stems from the problem of the diversity in India. In fact, someday somebody has to have a discussion as how what is the healthy level of diversity too. I mean, how diverse should a society be? I think if there was ever a classic case of diversity gone haywire, I think it's India. I mean, I always, every time I go to America, and when I see the Americans, talking about their diversity and look at our diversity, I just laugh at them. I literally laugh at them. I have more diversity in my state of Maharashtra than you have in the whole bloody country of America.
In my apartment complex.
Yeah. I like, you guys don't understand diversity, and you don't see the dark side of diversity.
Right.
Diversity mixed with left-wing identity politics is the most dangerous recipe. It is built in for disaster. And I'm not saying only the left wing is capable of identity politics. I think both sides are capable of identity politics. But the point is, tribalism is good at a certain level when it has to maintain its cultural characteristics. But when tribalism seeps into the main character of the state, it destroys it. And I mean, if there was ever a good example of that, I think it's the Republic of India. I think in the Republic of India, we have the worst experiment ever when it comes to identity politics, and we see it on a daily basis. I mean, we can pick n number of examples, but we still don't solve the question. Achha, one more question I had. When we say secularism, obviously it originated from the separation of church and state. But then, as societies mature, and as they say, the moral arch keeps expanding.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when the moral arch keeps expanding, the meaning of secularism, obviously, in the West also kept on expanding. It went from a separation of church and state, where the state will look at you as an individual, and then at that time the predominant definition of a group was only a religious group. But then you have homosexuality, you have other kinds of groups coming in. So now secularism in the West basically has morphed into a place where they say we will not appease any single group. That group could be a religious group, it could be a linguistic group, it could be any kind of group. Now, how has that played out, do you think, in the Indian context?
No, see, I think just because something works in the West doesn't mean it has to work in India. The biggest other issue I have with secularism, when you copy paste from the Western model, like many people seem to want to, is that there are certain things. One is the days of the week thing, but that's a trivial example. A very serious example, for example, is the issue of proselytism and conversion. When the state says, look, I'm not going to interfere, you guys do what you want, let's not talk about religion, I don't care, you are Indian as far as I'm concerned. What that does is it allows predatory faiths to proselytize, and the state will not interfere to protect its heritage, national fabric, whatever you want to call it. And this is what puts Hindus on the back foot there, because they're saying their culture is being eroded, and eventually if this keeps happening, because Hindus don't convert, they're going to eventually lose that battle. And this is the same thing in Israel. In Israel, many people don't understand exactly the whole proselytism thing, because many Israelis in their day-to-day lives are fairly secular, and they don't even understand why people would bother. But the few people who do sort of understand it are very much against proselytism. You will see, very rarely, like for example, there's this case in one of these kibbutz in wherever, I forget. The church went around putting these pamphlets all over the place, like, come, this Sunday, and this is going to be this service, and we're going to talk to you about XYZ. And then some Jewish religious group went around and tearing all those pamphlets down. And I think this became a police case or a court case or something. And the mayor made a statement saying nothing doing. And they won it on a technicality because the pamphlets were plastered all over the place illegally, and it was not your property, or it's not, and you're not allowed to deface public property. Only certain places you can. The Jewish group won that particular case, but nonetheless, this is a problem, right? And this is where, when you say secular expansion, we're not going to discriminate against any group. Well, in some cases, you have to discriminate in favor of your in-group, right? And I written an article 3-4 years ago based of this. Basically, there's this very nice book called De Mosaische Unterschiedung, the mosaic distinction, or the mosaic turn. I forget the translation in English. It's by a German scholar called Jan Assmann, and it's on my blog. It's called The Religious Other, and he explains what secularism really means, and what monotheism really means. And these are the differences which make a difference between a non-monotheistic society and a monotheistic society. Now, with Jews, it's complicated because, as you said, they are monotheistic, definitely, and they do have, some of these, like if there are 6 issues the pagan societies have, there'll be only 3 issues that the Jews have, and the biggest reason is because they don't want to convert, right? They're very strict about it. So but they do have some problems, but not as much as a pagan society does. One of the things is the notion of right and wrong. I can sit here and I can say, hey, listen, my Ishtadeva is Shiva, and you can sit there and be a Charvak. We can get along perfectly. I'm not going to try and convert you to my view. You're not going to try to convert me to your view. But we can sit and have a philosophical discussion on this very topic of our faiths, and it's perfectly fine. Because there's no right and wrong answer, because we don't know what happens after death, and we don't know what happens in the universe, in the great scheme of things. So until we have these sorts of answers, we can just, it's an intellectual game that we enjoy. But with monotheism, now you're right or you're wrong. My faith is right, you are wrong. And this is where the problem starts. And that's why, when people say, oh, India has to be secular, even if it's a Hindu state, it's like, no, it doesn't have to be secular. In fact, it should not be secular. But what you do mean, I think, is India should continue to be pluralistic and tolerant within the limits of that tolerance being reciprocated, obviously. And in that sense, yes, if that is your definition of secularism, then I'm all for it. But it is not. Let's. I want to stick to the original definition because it just keeps things a lot clearer in my head.
See, again, so we have unpacked a lot of information here, and I want to present it in a different way, which stems from the classical Popper's paradox, right? So you have what was Popper's paradox of tolerance or intolerance, whatever you want to call it. So what Popper basically presented, it was a case where, okay, you have a memeplex. Now, as long as that memeplex has a set of ideas that are based on certain non-negotiables, like you just said, I'm a Charvaka, you're a Shaivite. But both of us believe in the principles of mutual respect and reciprocity. Now, until both of us believe in the principles of mutual respect and reciprocity, the debate is going to be at the intellectual level. And then eventually, if you really believe in the strength of my ideas, you will convert to my point of view. Or if I believe in the strength of your ideas, I will convert to your point of view. And it will not be via force or via any sly attempt. And also there will be rules that, before I debate you, I should convince you that I know your theory as you know it, and you know my theory as I understand it. So there will be a Purva Paksha, Uttar Paksha. There are certain rules of the game.
Right.
Now, the moment, and I'm connecting this to the role of minorities in India, and this is where the problem stems in India. Now, the moment you have a memeplex entering this area, and that memeplex basically does not agree to the rules of the game, that memeplex or those ideas inside that memeplex do not believe in mutual respect and reciprocity. They believe in the garbage idea of tolerance. I mean, it has to be the most condescending thing on planet Earth. It's like, me telling you right now, oh, Jaideep, I'm tolerating you on this, on this video discussion. It's very condescending. It's actually a very garbage concept. And this is where the problem of secularism stands in India. I completely agree with you, but who is going to define that? When